All right, so I want to say thank you all so much to our panelists for joining us. We're really excited about closing out the year with this particular discussion, especially to have folks from such a variety of different backgrounds is really exciting in particular. So just to kind of briefly let everybody know who our panelists are today, we have Dr. Alexander Hyres, who is faculty at the University of Utah in the College of Education, Jay Blain, who is the, correct me if I'm wrong, Director of Research, is that right, Jay, at UEA?
Research and Policy Director.
Thank you. And Kamaile Tripp Harris, who is a community health worker extraordinaire and is currently coordinating community health workers in student-run clinics. So I will stop talking because we're not here to listen to me, and I will just ask our panelists, perhaps beginning with Kamaile, to tell us a little bit about yourselves, introduce yourselves, explain a little bit more about what you do and your interest in education. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Kamaile.
Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. My name is Kamaile Tripp Harris. I'm a community health worker for the School of Medicine in the Office of Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and I'm also a health equity consultant for the Department of Family and Preventive Medicine. What that looks like is I manage a team of community health workers from diverse populations who support who support our students in curriculum and at their student-led clinics. We teach them our scope and skills, and we help establish that lens of health equity and how total health is 50% outside of the clinic. And my interest in education is, one, to teach people how to think, be thoughtful, and learn new things and not be afraid of change. Also to help support the workforce as they're developing their skills, but also once they're there, to help them learn new technologies and new innovations to support their work. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Jay, I'll hand it over to you next.
Hi, I'm Jay Blain. I was a high school math and computer science teacher for 20 years, and then I left to work for the Utah Education Association. I would describe myself as an advocate for educators and students and for public education in general. Part of my role is to lobby at the legislature on behalf of all of those. And I also work a lot out in the field with our local leaders and staff and help them advocate for themselves and advocate for them as well. I am an alumnus of the University of Utah as well, with a bachelor's degree in math and a master's degree in educational studies.
Thanks so much. And Alexander Hyres, go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Alex Hyres, and I'm an assistant professor in the history of U.S. education. Before becoming a professor, I taught social studies and English to middle and high school students in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then I returned to graduate school at the University of Virginia to understand the relationship between Black educators and students in the civil rights movement. And now as a historian, my research focuses on Black education, teacher and student activism, curriculum and pedagogy, and school desegregation. And now in my role here at the University of Utah, besides research, I teach courses in the history of education, but also work with pre-service teachers as well.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. So now we've gotten a chance to hear a little bit more about our panelists. You'll notice that we've got, folks coming from very different perspectives, which is something we're excited about and will lead us into our next question, which is something that we debated a little bit at our previous seminar series on education and decent work. And I want to ask our panelists what they see as the end goal of education. Do you see it as career preparation? Do you see it as supporting intellectual development, as building critical capacity for students, or something else? And I'm curious how what you see as the end goal of education, how has that aligned or not aligned with your own educational experience? And I'll go ahead and continue us in that circle and hand it over to Kamaile first.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Doctor. So to me, lifelong learning is the most important trait that a person can have. I don't want to feel like I don't know anything, but I acknowledge I don't know everything. So I think just having that open mind and keeping that perspective throughout your life is important. In my experience and in my community's experience as an underserved population, education as a paid and attending in a classroom was not accessible. I grew up in a large family of a single mom who did not have funding for our day-to-day, let alone higher education. So I didn't attend higher education until I was an adult, and I'm still trying to get that degree. So I think it's important for education to be accessible, and that's going to require some policy changes and new ways of thinking. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if I could ask you a follow-up question, because I'm really curious about your perspective, do you think higher education should be pursued to get people better access to jobs and careers, or for kind of the joy of learning and learning more about how to think? Or what do you think the goal is of our current system, and what should it be?
Well, I also work part-time for Western Governors University, which has a competency-based model. And so, and just as our governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, has made it possible for jobs to be posted at the state level where they're highlighting deliverables rather than education, I think education should be considered life experience as well. So I think that there should be some sort of process or ability to do that. And as a community health worker helping to establish our workforce, this is the framework we're hoping to share as well.
Thank you so much. Jay, I'll go ahead and hand the question over to you. What seems to be the end goal of education as it is now, and how is that aligned or not aligned with your current experience?
Well, my philosophy is that education should prepare students to be citizens in the community and be productive citizens. And that entails critical thinking, being an informed citizen, and being able to find a job or career that will sustain them in the community. Whether that and that usually involves some sort of post-secondary training, whether it be in a college, in a university, in a trade school, or whatever that might be. And it also involves being able to be an informed citizen. When I did my master's degree, we studied this. Actually, this was a question we studied in one whole course. But Thomas Jefferson said the best defense against government is an informed citizenry. And I truly look at education as being that. If we want good government, we need informed citizens. If we want a good social justice, we need informed citizens. If we want good, even corporations, we need good education. It all rests on how well we are educating the next generation and how we are educating them, and what components we put into that education. And it can't just be, well, we want good worker drones. we need people with good social mores and good things like that. And that doesn't line up sometimes with what I see in schools.
And I really like that perspective that education benefits the society and the community as well as the individual. So thank you. Alex, I'll hand the question over to you, and I'll say, not to put too much pressure, I'm really curious about the historical perspective on this as well.
Yeah, that's actually where I was going to go, and I think it's going to kind of echo what's already been said a little bit. And I think as you look at like the history of schooling in the United States, there's been tensions between what the purpose of education should and could be. And colleagues like David Labouré have written specifically about these tensions. So one of the questions is education a public good or a private good? Is this something that individuals should benefit from? Should society benefit from that? And then under those umbrellas, as Jay was talking about, should education develop people as citizens or as workers? Should it be used in order to help students and their families elevate their socioeconomic status, or to help them seek justice in the world? And in my own experience as a student and now as a professor, I would say that most people view education as a private good now, that will get them a job and perhaps help them climb this socioeconomic ladder. And this was a message that I received from my parents and most of my teachers. And I'm sure that if I polled particularly my undergraduate students, they would articulate a certain experience, a similar experience too, that this degree that they're getting from the University of Utah is the path towards a good job that hopefully in the long term will either help them maintain their status or elevate it.
Well, thanks so much. And that kind of leads me right into my next question, which is to give a little bit of background about UPower. We use the phrase work equity a lot, by which we simply mean that everyone has a fair chance to hold a health supporting job that supports their well-being. And this is often referred to as decent work. Research tells us education currently matters to our ability to obtain work equity, to obtain decent work. And many people say, well, let's simply make access to higher education easier, more affordable, more accessible, and that will in itself make work more equitable. So I'm curious about your perspective. Is increasing access to higher education, is that going to change work and who has access to decent work, or is it more complicated than that? And Kamaile, I will let you lead off with our answer.
Thank you, Doctor. It's interesting that you say that. I have a background in mental and behavioral health care. And while I did not have a degree, I have more opportunities to do the work. So a degree is not going to keep them from doing the work. It's going to keep them from getting comprehensive pay. So that is what we experience as in the educational equity perspective. That is how we are underserved, is this thought that you have to have a degree to get the job. You don't. They're willing to train you. And I've done that 20 times over in my pathway to finding myself in my career. I've been an educator. I've been a manager. I provide health advice to my community, but I'm not a doctor. So you see what I'm saying? What is really needed in a mental and behavioral health perspective is for a person to know that they don't have to be pursuing a degree to be informed, just like Jay said, and that it is our right to be educated. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jay, I'll hand the question over to you. Is increasing access to higher education going to solve all the problems of work equity?
No. Short answer is no.
Yeah.
First of all, people have to be prepared for a higher ed because so it has to start early, really early. We have to have good nutrition for, pre-K, before pre-K, and things like that, good childcare, good healthcare for our, earliest people, little people. I'm trying infants, toddlers, because those conditions have to be good as well. And then we have to have good learning conditions for elementary and then middle school and high school kids, because you can't just start at the top and say, well, okay, now you're going to learn here. So you probably knew I was going to say something about we have to have all the way up. We have to have good access to learning and skill development during all that time, because by the time they get to higher ed, they have to be know how to learn. They have to have those metacognitive skills by then, or offering them, free community college or free college is just won't be helpful to them, and they won't know what to do with it. So that's a necessary component as well. And then much like Kamaile said, someone can get a degree, but if there's not equity in pay, if there's not equity in the honoring of those skills out there, I mean, we have people, childcare workers right now there's not dignity of work there. And our paraprofessionals in our schools right now get paid less than fast food workers. And that's criminal nearly. We can't find any. We can't find them. And the scarcity of resources in compensation for people who are doing very important work speaks to what you say about the dignity of work in those areas as well.
Thank you. And Alex, I'll turn the question over to you. Do you see increasing access to higher ed as a way to get more decent work for people, or what relationship do you see both historically and today?
So I would say that it's a complicated situation because what we see is with higher education, the cost has been increasing, and some in recent decades in exponential ways. I often will bring up to my students that the University of California system in the 1960s in World War II was not charging any tuition to students. And so we have to ask, like, is this higher education degree and credential going to lead to a better job? And what will that cost be? Because that cost is being borne by students in a way that I don't know that it's going to get better. If anything, it's just going to become more and more expensive. And I think I'm concerned about this sort of tightening between education and work, and assuming that, like, you need to have this degree or this credential in order to do particular types of work. And already, I think that our society asks education to solve a lot of our problems. We ask it to care for students. We ask it to solve all of our problems, whether it be poverty or inequality or homelessness. And so I think disentangling those two things a little bit more and asking hard questions about whether we do need more education, or maybe we need to ask different industries whether they should bear the burden of training and paying for that training as well.
Thank you. That's a really, I think, all those are really useful additions to this conversation. And to kind of riff off of that, there's been a lot of discussion late regarding alternatives to our current educational system, be that, non-traditional students, adult pathways to college, having younger students in high school have college experiences, or moving outside the realm of higher education altogether, things like apprenticeships and on-the-job training, and, lots of other alternatives. And I'm curious, can you tell us which alternative or alternatives seem the most promising to you and why? And Kamaile, I know you've done a lot of thinking about this.
Yes, thank you. And I'd love to share the model of WGU, because what they're doing is providing pathways to education for the jobs that are in high demand for our communities socially. So teachers, healthcare, business, and sorry, the other one is on it. I'll think about it in just a second. But they're the teachers, sorry. And so what they're doing is they have created products to support the student in their journey from pre-college, just maybe they're still in high school and they're thinking about the transition, and then incubating community-based efforts and community-based resources and technologies, so which is their WGU labs. And as well, they have created a model of education where they can really tailor it to the student. And it's affordable because everything is online. And so when we're talking about the cost of education raising, I would love for you all to hear some of the presentations that Scott Pulsifer has done, the president of WGU. where he talks about how you don't have to increase the price of education to make it more equitable. You just need to tailor it to the student and measure your outcomes by their success. And so they've really done that. And I'm a student of theirs as well, and feel supported wholeheartedly in my journey in education. They help whatever I'm deficient in as a student, they have a product for us. So not only that, but they're working with major organizations like Oracle and Microsoft and with companies like KFC and Amazon, where they're building the capacity of their workers to be more prepared for college and to find pathways to education. So they're offering products right like excuse me, I forgot your first name, but Dr. Hyres said that they're just like a community health worker would tailor an intervention for a community member. They're doing that for education. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Jay, I'll hand the question over to you.
Well, there's certainly models that could be altered and adjusted. And my hypothesis is always that society gets the education, the system they demand, and many people are just comfortable with what we have, and they just send their kids to schools, and there it is. But there's a lot of innovation out there that I think people don't realize is available or out there, and or even know about. I know a lot of the school districts, at least in the Salt Lake area, have technical institutes or centers, and kids can go there and learn a lot of very advanced things while they're still in high school. A lot of students, through concurrent enrollment and through working with universities and stuff like that, are graduating high school with associate's degrees. There's acceleration like that that's happening. Things that, now I'm pretty old. A long time ago when I was in high school, I was able to take 2 AP classes. That was it. And so there's all sorts of things that are available to students now that they can do. Apprenticeships, I think, are, when unions were a lot more, of course, I'm going to bring up the union angle, but when unions were a lot more prevalent or around, the apprenticeships, they're still there. People aren't, I don't know if people are as aware of them, but I think working with community college and places like that, apprenticeships are a wonderful thing. Some places, I know UVU has had a program where, because they transitioned from a technical college background, and they have a thing called stackable credentials, where someone can get work on, they become a welder, and then they can work up to a 4-year degree, but those credentials stack, so they don't have to redo courses. Things like that are very innovative and can work well with the regional tech centers that we have, places like that. Those are an underappreciated resource, I think, that we have in the state. The applied technical colleges, that's what I was trying to come up with, sorry. Students can go to there and maybe get a 2-year degree or even a 9-month certificate in something, and get a skill, and then maybe work at a job at that. And they decide, well, now maybe I want something more. And hopefully we can have programs where they don't have to redo courses if they want to now get a 2-year, 4-year degree based on those previous skills and things they've already learned. I really like to see, in education, residency programs where, we have the old model of traditional student teaching and things like that, but where we could have, if we had resources and we had like that, where instead of just doing student teaching, where, and it would really help with our, class sizes and things like that, where a aspiring educator would come in and just work for do a residency for a year with in a school, something like that, where they come in and they really learn how to be a teacher, something like that. I know there are programs in other states that have that. intern model or a residency program model like that. But some of those things I put out there, just but also models that help students who struggle, who where they may not be the best academic students, so they're not looking to advance their learning, but they're trying to figure out why do I even go to school? What's there for me? So something to help those students too, and give them a reason to not drop out and not, try and figure something out before they think it's too late, and then they really have some real issues. So
Thank you. And I wanted to underline something you said at the beginning, because I think this is very true, which is there are these programs available. People don't think about them even necessarily as education, which I think is pretty interesting. And Alex, I'll hand the question over to you. What alternatives seem most promising to you from your perspective in higher education?
I'll step back and just say that I do worry about focusing too much on alternatives in our current educational system. And to be clear, I'm not suggesting that the current K through 12 or higher ed system works for all students. It's clear as a professor now, but also as a teacher. But I'm also wary of the ways that education has and continues to be commodified for profit. And especially knowing how reform movements have gone over time, I think with any new approach, we need to ask a lot of questions. Like, first, have we tried this approach before? And if so, how has it been tried before? And who's benefiting from this? And how do they benefit from it? And I think it's important sometimes to follow the money to figure out, like, okay, well, why is it that this is the approach that we're using in education? Because there is a lot of money to be made in education. And so we're seeing in our state and in other states this move towards vouchers for private schooling. And the initial work coming out is showing that these programs were sort of billed as they're going to help less fortunate students and bring them into private school settings. And the research out of Arizona and West Virginia so far is basically showing that it's a handout for rich people who already attend private school. And so I think we need to be critical and look into these things to figure out, like, okay, how is this alternative benefiting the students, and how is this benefiting other people who are involved in the operation? And I do want to highlight one of the things that Jay said, particularly for teachers. I went through a master's program at the University of Washington that required that I was in a classroom a lot. And I didn't really understand how important that was going to be as I entered my first year of teaching, which is, often the most challenging year for any teacher. But I had built up so much time in the classroom that it was less challenging than it could have been. And the programs that Jay's talking about, there is one actually in Seattle that's a teacher residency where the district pays those teacher candidates to work in the classrooms and to be another teacher. So it's benefiting the school, it's benefiting the students, and then also just giving those teacher candidates a lot of time in the classroom. And so I would like to see more programs that provide those experiences to students, because especially in a profession such as teaching, the amount of time that people spend in the classroom beforehand and build up those repetitions of handling different things and making decisions, because a lot of teaching is just making thousands of decisions all day long. And so I think there's a real benefit to programs like that, because what I have seen oftentimes is the shortcut is with teachers and master's degrees is, we'll just give you the degree, but we're not going to give you the experience alongside that really helps you to be successful, because ultimately we want that individual and that group to be successful, not only for themselves, but also for the students in the classroom. There's definitely a trickle-down effect.
Thank you so much. And I think it's really important to point out, like, a lot of these programs feed into each other and can have real application brought together. And I'm going to leap off something else that you said, which is let's ask if we've done these things before. Let's see how well they work. Let's see who has an investment in these particular programs working. And I'll ask Kamaile, when it comes to education and work, what do you wish we knew more about? What do you wish researchers would focus on? What would help you make those arguments for more accessible education?
Workplace competency is a thing. Like, even if you have a degree, you have to go and do the work to really be prepared and feel like you can make a difference in your space. And I just want to back up and share that I got my associate's degree through Corinthian colleges or Everest College in West Valley. And if you don't know their history, they were actually charged and convicted of creating a diploma mill, and they had to compensate us. And that degree is useless at a major university right now. So like the Western Governors University really tailors their program so that when that happens to a student, their degree or their transcript is still acceptable. Other things that they do to provide access is they accept students monthly. So each student is on their own track. And then their terms are 6 months, and it's only about $3,600 a month, or for the 6 months period. And students are allowed to accelerate once they've completed their full-time work. So that really allows students to hit the ground running and complete their programs earlier and save money. So, and I'm sorry, Doctor, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, of course. And this might be really interesting to think about in terms of WGU. What sort of research do you wish was being done on this model of education?
Right, are the different careers that are not available. So in our work together with UPower as CHWs, we know that there's no infrastructure for us, no expectation for us, no understanding of the work that we do. Further, there's no system that can house us. Like, if you look at the University of Utah salary and scales, there is only a scale for community health workers and patient interactions, not in what I'm doing, which is program management and policy development. So we really need to understand what are the innovative careers of the future and start building those pathways so we can stay on top of it as education. Thank you.
Thank you. Jay, I'll turn the question over to you. What research do you wish people were doing on the connection between education and good work? What are the questions we should be asking?
What? It's hard because I always think about, if you're in high school right now, there might be a lot of the jobs that if you go to a 4-year degree, a lot of the jobs haven't even been, there's jobs that don't exist yet. And so how do you know? I would say then, what is the best preparation you can do what skills should students be learning either in secondary school or in post-secondary that are applicable for that you could use for any job? Okay. And it seems like one of those note type of research questions. In other words, you know what the answers probably are before you start the research. And I see a lot of that in the education. And like, I see a research paper and I read it and I go, well, yeah, I pretty much knew what the answer was going to be, but I'm glad they proved it. Because I think students are best served by not having such a narrow focus sometimes and having a broader array of skills that are general and applicable to any job, because you don't necessarily know what job you're going to have. And it's like, and I'm sort of biased, but I would tell students, take as much math as you can handle, because that will only expand your opportunities. Okay. But you want to be able to communicate well. You want to be able to think well, problem solve. I think that's why people push computer science or programming to at least take one programming class or something, because that's going to help you think well, problem solve, organize your thoughts. And if you ever have to use Excel, it'll help you with Excel, and things like that. And I guess the research is what skills will best serve you in an ever-changing, ever-evolving job market, and serve you as a citizen as well. Because, you know, people keep telling us, well, you have to teach financial literacy to students. Well, I never learned financial literacy, but my math skills helped me understand finances. It helped me understand investing. It helped me. I was on the state retirement board for a while, and I understood the investing there because it was all math based. But so skills. So what skills? I guess the research is I'm thinking about is what are the basic skills that will benefit you as a citizen and as a job seeker?
Thank you. I think that's a question that's really applicable to today's workforce, because, you know, who knows what career you'll enter into. It may, as you say, may not exist yet, or the career you thought you would enter into no longer exists. Alex, we'll go ahead and turn the question over to you. What connections between education and work do you wish research was exploring?
So I think for me, I want to know sort of a philosophical question, which is like, who should bear the burden for education, particularly adult education? Because as we've talked about in this conversation, the consensus in our society seems to be that should be a tightly knit relationship between education and work. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best approach for our democracy or seeking justice and equity in our world. And I often get frustrated when I hear CEOs or people who are in industry, and they'll say young people don't have the content or the skills or the habits to be successful in the jobs that we have at our company. And then they'll go and they'll blame schools and colleges and universities, but they forget that like schools, colleges, and universities are not the only places where our education occurs. And of course, these industries could and should take on more responsibility for teaching the knowledge and skills for a particular job. Because it's asking too much of our K through 12 educators and then professors at colleges and universities to train young people for every single job that they might encounter in their adult life. And I still think that there's obviously a place for schools, colleges, and universities to teach critical thinking, reading, writing, listening, and speaking, as it has been brought up. But I think that we need to have a more collaborative approach, and we need to start asking, these industries, what are you doing to take on the burden of education, whether that's the cost or the actual energy that's involved in doing so?
Seems like a really important question that we're not really asking right now. Thank you. So we've alluded throughout this conversation to connections between education, work, and social justice. So rather than asking you to re-articulate those, what do you wish the society better understood about those connections? What would you, if you could pass a message out to society through some magic absorption, what message would you want to communicate to our communities and our society at large? And Kamaile, I'll start with you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak first. I feel like I'm very humbled to be on this panel with such wonderful speakers today. What I've always thought, and working in mental behavioral health care, that if it's not a part of our society, it is not attainable individually. So what I'm talking about is if education is not accessible to everyone, then we do have people who don't have the ability to think. I've worked with children for a long period of time, and I've worked with adults, and I see the different levels of education ability. I've worked with people from all walks of life and many different diverse communities, and I see that not having a free educational system and understanding of our bodies, our health, family relationships, and development, it is going to hinder us in our social, and this is the roots of our social issues, is that we don't actively teach parents about mental and behavioral health and their contributions to our children as they enter the world as functioning adults. The fact that we can't make connections between our divorce and poor relationships with our previous spouses, and the way that we hurt one another mentally, emotionally, and physically with the way that our children behave as adults is my evidence there. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jay, I'll ask you the same question. What do you wish our society understood about the connections between education, work, and social justice?
Well, that they're all related. that education, that our ability to provide these things to everyone matters. As Dr. Hyres said, we can't provide education to the wealthy through and subsidize it through vouchers and then expect public education to fix everything. Though that's not right. That doesn't work. And rights aren't this limited resource. When you give rights to one group, you're not taking away from someone else. People seem to think that, well, if we give rights to this group or talk about rights for this group, then we're taking rights away from someone else. Well, we're not, right? They're not this limited pie that we have to cut up and share. It doesn't work that way. So if we're, and that everyone deserves education, and people becoming educated is a good thing. And for a long time, there's certain groups that have used education as a way to keep people in their place, or a lack of education, almost like a caste system at times. And so, the upper peak crust are going to have this level of education and these good education opportunities, and the lower class is not. They're going to have this basic, economy car type of education, and we're going to keep you in your place by your lack of education or a very low budget education, and that's we can't have that as a society and have social justice and equity, and so we can't have really nice facilities in one area and then run down and horrible facilities in a different section of the city or state and expect that to be, and that's not equity either. So those are what I'd like to say about it.
Valuable messages. Thank you. And Alex, I'll turn the question over to you. What do you wish society understood about these connections?
I agree that they're all connected. And I think another piece of education, and particularly thinking about teachers, but all workers, and we've seen some of these movements around the country, which is the power of unionization and collective work of workers, that has a lot of power in creating decent work that is meaningful, but also that people are compensated for in adequate and appropriate ways. So I think that I would like to see more education along the lines of unionization and having workers think about themselves not as individuals, but as part of collectives, because I think that has real power to change the shape of work, whether it's for teachers or other individuals in education or across industries.
Thank you. Yes, music to our ears. And the last question before I'll see if the audience has anything to ask. What, if any, opportunities for research do you see in helping society better understand these connections? And Kamaile, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Doctor. I really feel like there is a lot of research that could be done about credentialing, that sometimes the competency that you need on the job can be obtained on the job. So looking into certifications and other pathways to education, and definitely finding out from the community what the barriers are to education. And I'm a community health worker. We're really trying to reestablish systems with that community component. So I think that is needed more. Thank you.
Thank you. Jay, what opportunities for research do you see here to help people better understand these connections?
Well, I think research could be had in various areas, but one I see is the research in the thing I mentioned, the level of experience maybe of teachers in Title I schools compared to non-Title I schools, for example, or the because or the amount of turnover in the teaching force in those schools compared to non-Title I schools. Title I being a proxy for less advantaged students, economically disadvantaged students, or the age of their school buildings, or the condition of their buildings, or things like that. That's just something I would put out there. You're muted.
I'm muted. Thank you. Thank you. And Alex, I'll hand the question over to you. What opportunities for research do you see here?
I think there's lots of opportunities for research. For me, historically, I'm interested in how teachers' work environments have changed over time, particularly for Black teachers, Indigenous teachers, other people of color, and the ways that school systems have supported them, and often is the case in my own research, not supported them or pushed them out. And so I think some of those historical questions in my own work, but other people I know, can help us to understand why we ended up with the teaching force that we have today, and why we have certain policies that exist, such as like teacher tenure, or which is, a very important thing for people who are sort of sharing their knowledge. And, we're going to see in this state how powerful those tenure laws are, particularly with the legislative session coming up. So I'd like to see more research looking at the conditions of workplace and how we can better improve those.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I'll turn to our audience. Do you have any questions for our panelists?
I do, of course. I'm interested. This may be a very short answer, a very long answer, but we've talked, we started off talking about what education is for. And, there's sort of this fitting for life or fitting for work bifurcation, and then all the space in between. And I wonder about something that, I wonder if the panelists would differentiate between education and training. And if we think there's utility in that, and what you think that utility is.
I'll let anyone who wants to answer. Jay, go ahead.
Well, there's certainly, so if you look at training, so I might go to a very short course to get some training. I may want to go improve my skills in a certain area. Maybe I want to I mentioned Excel before. Maybe I want to go get some training on Excel. And so I go to a week-long course, maybe, or I even do an online course to get some more skills in Excel. And I would consider that training.
Mm-hmm.
I might even consider someone who wants to become a welder. And that's, you know, I think I would classify that more as training, skills training, because you know, they're learning all the ins and outs of how to be a welder. When you look at, you know, your whole, you know, K through 12 education, there's components of training in there, but that's more of a whole picture of education, because you're learning more than just skills. I mean, you can say, well, you're learning to read and you're learning to write and you're learning computational skills, but you're also learning, and the word skills comes in, because you're learning social skills. You're learning, people would assert that you're learning how to be on time and how to work with others and how to work in a group and how to function in a and follow rules. And some people would say, well, yeah, that's part of it too. So I guess that's how I differentiate between, you know, education and skills.
Thank you so much. Kamaile, Alex.
Yeah,
Oh, Kamaile, I'm sorry, you're on mute.
to quote a famous thinker, Albert Einstein, he said, education is not the memorizing of facts, but the training of the mind to think. To me, that's the foundation of education, is that we're just learning how to think, how to take notes, how to remember things and get the best out of our cognitive ability to, you know, transfer thought from our brain to our understanding to our actions. To me, I provide a lot of training, and training is to help fill those gaps of education when they have not learned or developed that skill. I've been a classroom teacher and I've been a social skills teacher for children, and not everyone learns the same way. So you had to tailor the way you educate. And when I educate adults, I have to survey the way that they think and learn best. So like that all combines to being education, and training to me is education. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
I would just say that I think of education as being sort of the broad umbrella of things, and training is more specifically tailored towards a job. And part of that is also just like socialization within certain professions. If you're going to become a lawyer, there's certain things that you're going to learn that turns you into a lawyer. Sometimes when I work with graduate students, it's like, you're turning me into a researcher. Or I've had friends that are doctors, and it's like, well, they're turning me into a doctor. And it's like, well, what did you think was going to happen as part of this training? And so I think with training, it is more narrowly focused on a specific job than education sort of encompasses the long and broad view of what you're learning.
Thank you. Any other questions for our panelists?
Like Emily, I also have to say I have a question. I'm notorious for asking questions as well. So I think I think your discussion brought this out really, really well. What we learned is there are, you know, at least two, maybe more different types of perspectives on many of these issues, and they are kind of polarized. So I think I have sympathies for certain positions, clearly. However, I think how do we try to implement, you know, maybe education and not training, but education when we're living in a context where at least these two different ends of the spectrum are pushing very, very different approaches? How can we consolidate this? Because in a way, I think we want critical minds, but, you know, some people feel uncritical minds are easy governable. So how can we consolidate this? And I think probably Alexander is telling me, yeah, this has been a tension for 250 years of educational policies in the United States and worldwide. But I feel right now we are under this really interesting threat, because what we're seeing is a lot of technical skills are being required and are forced. And I mean, even as part of the university community, what I experience is that we are not asked actually anymore to provide critical thinking skills, but more skills that are consumable by those players in industry. And with that, I'll stop.
Thank you. I'd love to share my thoughts on that. When we're working in our diverse communities to help them build their capacity to address their health and their social change needs, it starts with self-advocacy. So whatever education model is built, we should be empowering people to self-advocate. Have you ever sent an email with all of the details and somebody's like returns an email saying, asking the questions that were already provided in the previous email? So that person obviously did not learn how to read the email first and see if it contains those questions before they asked a question. Also, when they're approaching someone who makes a mistake, have you been approached by people who are condemning and trying to blame you for this error, rather than being informative and providing feedback? So these are also educational things. And I think it describes what you were talking about, is the push against the different sides. So where I'm coming from, I'm an apologist for humanity. In our social, emotional, and mental health development, we require self-advocacy. So it helps us to problem solve and think and create things like the will. So that is what I would say is, when you err on the side of human ability, that's right. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex, Jay, either one of you want to tackle that?
It is a conundrum, because in the public school system right now, we're facing a certain amount of tension because of a very vocal minority that doesn't want us to have anything to do with social emotional learning or diversity, equity, inclusion, things like that. They're thinking those are really bad things, and that we're trying to indoctrinate students if we have those type of things in our curriculums or in our schools. Because I don't know, it's there's a real tension there and a real pushback on those things. And I really tend to believe those are really good things, to be inclusive and don't ever say the word critical either, because then that leaves critical thinking, and critical thinking is bad, or that other critical word. Anyway, but it's so teachers are under intense scrutiny right now on those fronts, and you're gonna, and the legislative session was mentioned, and there's going to be, I believe, bills talking about trying to again eliminate diversity, equity, inclusion things in universities or departments like that, and which is, I don't understand that either. And classroom neutrality bill, and more things on sensitive materials. Sorry if I'm going off on a tangent here, but those are issues that some people are pushing. I think the majority of people in our state are not in favor of those measures, and we need the silent majority to push back on these things and be out there. So Frank, I think the silent majority needs to speak up more and be out there, so that it reduces the tension, and reduces the effect of the very small but vocal minority that is causing a lot of that tension.
I'll just quickly say
ahead.
that, yes, I would agree that as Frank anticipated, I would say these tensions have been here for a long time, but I do think that doesn't mean that things aren't different right now. And I do see, even working with undergrad students in particular, is this idea of not necessarily broad critical thinking skills, but consumable skills. They want to have things provided. As an example from this semester, it's like, I want to teach you the right questions to ask as a classroom teacher to seek equity, justice, and inclusion. But that's going to look different depending on who your students are, what school you're in, what district, if you stay in Utah. And for some of them, that's very frustrating to hear because it's not so simple. It's not so easy to just consume that. It requires that they sort of get repetitions and asking those hard questions and building up those capabilities. And I'm not sure what the path forward is other than to just, keep pushing that in my own corner of the world.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I want to say thank you so much for everybody for joining us, and especially a hearty thank you to our panelists. This has been a really fun conversation to listen in on. So thank you all. We really appreciate it. And I hope everyone has a wonderful winter break, and rest of a happy Thursday.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.